Well, this evening, we're keen to hear some of your own personal stories with how the crime rate in South Africa has affected you, right? Your interactions with crime and any aid and assistance that you think you've received from law enforcement. And if that's been sufficient, give us a call on 010-594-6010 or send us a WhatsApp. It can be a text message or even a video so we can see your face. The number is 072-110-5584. But let's get into our panel. We start off here in studio. We are, of course, joined by crime expert, Professor Jacob Mofokeng. Prof, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Standing sole in studio with me, but quite the panel that we've got joining us via video link as well. We have KwaZulu-Natal Community Policing Forum Secretary, Siyanda Biyela. Good evening to you. Gun Free South Africa Director, Adele Kirsten. We will also be, in a few moments, speaking to Safer South Africa Foundation CEO, Riah. You'd remember that she's, of course, a former National Police Commissioner. We're also joined by Richard Mamabolo, of course, representing Popcru, and Western Cape Community Police Board spokesperson, Rafique Foflonker. But I want to start here in studio, Prof, and give you some of these numbers, right? We've got serious crimes declined by 5.1%, a murder rate that's down by 5.8%. Anytime we hear a decline, we think, okay, less people losing their lives in comparison to those that lost their lives in the previous quarter, surely. But do we still have a big problem? So just your initial reaction to hearing the numbers as they were touted by the Police Minister today.
Yes, thank you very much for having me, and as well as your viewers, good evening, as well as the guests. Yeah, well, we are talking about lives here that were lost, and decline. It does not mean that indeed we have turned the tide, against crime. So it's just that, those collaborative efforts, as the minister indicated, that, he believes in, whole of society approach towards tackling crime. Then we see a tingling of, maybe a tip of an iceberg to be able to see that eventually then there's something towards giving us a hope. But based on the number of statistics, South Africa remains, quite a violent country where, it's easy for one to kill a person. So we're still really looking forward. So what we have received today is not just something that to celebrate about, it's something that we can look for also for the second reporting to check that indeed, this collaborative effect, is it working, and then it has lasting impact.
Yeah, the collaborative effort is something that we're going to get into a little bit later on about just how much work needs to be done when cases are even handed over from SAPS, for instance, to the National Prosecuting Authority. Let's save that for later and just get the responses to the numbers here. And in fact, you make the point, Prof, that it does not mean we're turning the tides. These are people that we're talking about. And once you start looking at those numbers of the people that we're talking about, it actually sounds a little bit frightening, I'd argue. 935 women were killed in the 3 months between July and September this year. Just think about that number. And then 315 children were murdered during that same period. I mean, you think about what 3 months is in your life, and then think about that over 1,200 vulnerable people that have been murdered in that short period of time. And we haven't even looked at the murders of males in South Africa. But let me bring you in here, Adele, because obviously what we're seeing here is a vulnerability, and you talk all the time about gun violence, how easily available. One thing is for sure, when we look at the murders of women, a lot of them happen in their homes, and we talk about how easily accessible it is to bring a gun into your own home. So do we have a success here in the data that we heard today, Adele?
Good evening, Naledi. Some very worrying trends here. So despite the decline in overall murder, there's an increase in the murder of children and women. And particularly with regard to women, we've seen this emerging trend over the last 2 or 3 years, and a sort of steady uptick in the number of women who are being killed. And the key thing here is an increase in women being killed in public. And if we look at the MRC femicide data, which was released a couple of weeks ago, there's still a significant increase in women being killed in the home with a gun by their intimate partner. And so guns remain the leading cause of murder in this country, and they remain at 45% of all murders. A gun is used. So that number has not changed. We are still sitting at 32 gun deaths a day. So there hasn't been a shift in the percentage of guns being used to kill people. So that's the one thing. And I think we must assume that the Lusikisiki massacre, which involved mainly women, this would form part of this number. So this is a worrying new trend of women increasingly being seen as legitimate targets in public places. When it comes to children, we know particularly on the Cape Flats or areas where there are sort of active gangs, that children really are at risk of being caught in the crossfire. But just last week, a 14-year-old walking to Elsie's River was shot and killed. So this is about the vulnerability of young people in places where there's high levels of gang activity. And these are two really worrying trends, which of course point to the fact that guns remain a central driving force of violence and crime in this country.
Yeah, as you make the example around Lusikisiki, Adele, I immediately think about what we heard today from Major General Thulare Sikhukhune, and he talked about, as we sort of see the ranking of the most deadly provinces, if that's the right word to use, at the top of that list, the Eastern Cape. But then it's followed up by the Western Cape. And Rafique, this is where I'll bring you in here, because what Major General Sikhukhune talked about is a driving force behind those numbers in the Western Cape, for instance, being the issue of mass shootings. So you may very well have less incidents than what we're expecting, but you've got more people dying in one particular moment, right? Is that a big concern? And what do you make about that development? Is it different to what we've seen in previous years, Rafique?
Yeah, there's definitely concern around this. I mean, as you say, fewer incidents, but more murders. So you look at how the stats are collected. It's, maybe less dockets, but, more incidents and more charges, per docket, which is very shocking. So, these murders, though, in many cases, gang-related or people sending a message, as far as the gang activity is concerned, is still a cause for concern. And looking at what happened, recently with the two females murdered, I think it was in Delft or Mfuleni, one of our top 30 stations, women were killed in that particular location as well. So if the target was a particular male or a gang member, then we have innocent people or maybe related people being killed in the same incident. And so it's no longer a question of us looking at, one victim or one target. It's people that are being killed as a result of indiscriminate, wild and reckless shooting. And, as Adele pointed out, the 14-year-old that was shot in Elsie's River, that could very well have been the result of somebody who was just mentally deranged, who actually went after the kids. I mean, I don't even think there was a gang motive there. It was just somebody who had a firearm. Who was perhaps, maybe had some mental, healthcare issues, but decided to shoot at learners at the school premises. So, yeah, it is cause for concern. Guns is definitely a problem. I think the Department of Health released some statistics, I think this week or late last month, and there they report that of about 1,700 incidents involving firearms and knives. I think less than 500 were firearm related, but there's still a big concern around stabbings as well. And so we need to look at that as well, not just the firearms, but the carrying of knives that can inflict bodily harm. That's something that needs to be looked at as well.
Yeah. Siyanda, I'll bring you in. What do you make of the trend then in KwaZulu-Natal, also a province that has been flagged as you know, one of the more dangerous provinces to live in. But also what we heard today was, you know, graphs and data that's been shared around the murders that are being reported at various police stations. And of course, Inanda eThekwini ranking as the biggest murder hotspot in the country. Talk to me about the trends that we're picking up there, if there's anything changing. And then policing in KwaZulu-Natal being such a big talking point this year, is that helping in any way, Siyanda?
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Naledi. Good evening to the viewers and the panel. I think what we must comprehend is that we must congratulate the SAPS because it shows that the picture is painted with the Q2 or the second quarter in terms of crime speaks to a way forward in terms of getting the communities involved. Because remember, colleagues, one of the aspects and the key aspects in crime prevention that you must always have is that the involvement of the community in terms of giving that information, in terms of giving that spot on direction towards the perpetrators and the suspects in our community speaks to a great value of concern that you must always perpetrate and find a way. The issue of Inanda really has taken us eyebrows for years. We must agree that the issue of environmental design in the area needs to be looked at. We'll find a way to engage with the Premier, who now is the political head of the Department of Community Safety and Liaison, to ensure that we find a way to look into the design of Inanda on itself in terms of getting most of the spaces accessible with the police, because most of these cases are happening at night or at places where they can't be reached with vehicles. So we're looking at such aspects to really look into assisting the area. But again, the accessibility of guns in our communities is still really a worrying factor. We've been saying this for a long time, saying the guns are in our communities and we do not understand how and where they come from. We do know that the SAPS has opened up a window for all people to come in and surrender and submit their guns without any cases being opened, so that we take them away from our communities. We here sitting today, the Deputy President of the Republic was inaugurating or opening up the first week of the 16 days of activism. And it just shows that most of the people who we see in these crime states who are victims are women and children. It must be taken to ourselves and say, part of the issues that are raised is that places that these victims are being abused on are places of where they are being dominated, I'd say, are places where they are within the households, indoors. So that is why we want to also promote that our people in our communities must not be afraid to come outside and raise issues that they have and raise concerns with their husbands, their family members, if there's any abuse, because those are indoor abuses which really a police officer wanting to give you a service can't really access the household and understand what is happening there at night or during the day. But part of what the ministry has done, which I believe will have, going to the third quarter, will then see change, is these cooperative agreements with the metro municipalities. I believe that throwing in all resources in one space and ensuring that we create an impactful service to our people will really assist us in cleansing eThekwini, KwaZulu-Natal, and the South African spaces as a whole.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to a point where we get to, I suppose, touch on policing, right? And we make the example around Inanda, but Richard, maybe this is where I bring you in from Popcru's point of view. When we see a decrease in crime numbers, are we looking at it because we have a better work being done from a policing point of view, or is it just what we're able to see being reported? Because that is also a big difference between the crimes being committed and those that are being reported. In fact, you were quoted in August, Mr. Mamabolo, where you talked about how the crime stats in our country are a reflection of poor working conditions and uneven resource allocation for our police. So did that change in the second quarter?
Good evening to you, the panelists and the viewers. Look, I think of course we do note the outcomes of this current crime statistics, but you remember that the reason why we moved away from announcing annual statistics to quarterly statistics was precisely for the reason that you need to give policing enough time to plan, because statistics are not an end in themselves, but it means to an end. So having them on a quarterly basis, the main aim was to ensure that police could look into the different changes that have been occurring on a quarterly basis and actually ensure that there are resources invested in those areas. So just as you're speaking about the issue around Inanda, for example, Inanda has been the capital city of the capital place of Meda for quite some number of time. That then shows that there have not been sufficient resources channeled towards actually dealing with that area. In fact, the area has got one police station and it serves a huge population of people. So under no circumstances can you then fight crime without actually ensuring that you put in more resources and actually ensure that we build closer working relationships with community policing forums, because that has also been one of the challenges in the past 2 years. So we need to look at it from that perspective. We think that, of course, we are worried about we're not necessarily satisfied about the declines, because even if you look at the percentages, it's between 3 to 5% increases, or when there are decreases, it's also between 3 to 5%. So that shows that as much as the minister might have good objectives of dealing with the challenges around crime, the main issue has been the uneven allocation of resources, which we continue to stress, because I think as much as we need to obviously, like the professor had indicated, work together to ensure that this is a joint effort.
Yep.
However, you definitely need to ensure that there are resources channeled towards ensuring that the police are capacitated. Just recently, we've been having what you call austerity measures and cost containment measures. That has resulted in the decline of the staff complement of the SAPS, not only the SAPS, by the way, of all public sector workplaces, and that, of course, has got a negative impact on service delivery in general.
Yeah. We're also joined now by the retired General Riah, who, of course, you remember as the former National Police Commissioner. But now she is the founder and CEO of Safer South Africa Foundation. General, a good evening to you. Thank you for your time. Richard Mamabolo of Popcru saying, yes, the issue of the allocation of resources is incredibly important if we're going to see those crime stats come out. From someone who sat at the helm of things, though, how difficult is it to actually get the necessary resources and also to capacitate police? Yesterday we spoke to the South African Police Union and they say police are not paid enough money, but then we have the issue of needing to employ more people. What's the biggest challenge in capacitating our police services, General?
I guess, good evening to the panelists, good evening to your viewers, and thank you very much for the invitation to be part of these conversations. Just a question that you've asked. I guess each and every department currently is sitting in a very tight spot. The cake that has to be divided amongst them has shrunk. But at the end of the day, we are expecting those that are prioritizing to look at issues that are creating significant pressure on the country to be looked upon. So prioritization becomes a very, very critical issue. If you are saying crime is at the apex of the problems that we're facing, just looking at your bulletins, there is, any bulletin you look at, there's murder, there's rape, there is this, there is that. So that tells a story about where we should be navigating towards emphasizing allocation of resources. Indeed, if you were just to compare the police and the private security sector and just look at the numbers, sheer numbers that we're talking about, and the resources, comparing the two, you will see that there is a significant disjuncture in terms of those. So it is important for those who are managing the resources of the public to look at what is pinching the country and make sure that those areas are significantly taken care of if we are to be able to mitigate crime.
Yeah, we're taking calls on this as well, 010-594-6010, because we really want to know, as you look at the crime stats and we hear from the police minister that the percentage of people that has been killed in the second quarter sees a decline, right? So 5.8% less people killed between July and September. Is that for you reprieve? And how has crime impacted you in your own community? We've got Duduzile on the line in Guamashu. Duduzile, a good evening to you and thanks for calling. Hi, Duduzile, are you there with us? Okay, we've dropped that line. Okay, let's take a look at some WhatsApps that have come in, though. That number 072 1105584. Quite a few that have come in. Because this is the unfortunate thing about being a South African is so many of us have been impacted by crime at one point or another. Pumla Komoyi in Kimberley says, hi Naledi and the team, crime makes me as a woman look over my shoulder every time I walk in the street or even in a mall. I feel like a prisoner in my own home. We're constantly aware of the crime around us. Pumla, a really interesting point. Thanks for sending in that message. Sipo Shongwe in Soshanguve says, hi Naledi, it cannot be correct. It is only SAPS that gives crime stats. What about NPA? How many were prosecuted? Correctional services, how many were received and rehabilitated? Sipo, thanks for that. Eddie, calling in, sending in a message from Soweto saying, I'm self-employed South African doing deliveries in town and it isn't safe at all. I've been hijacked several times. Currently, I'm depressed with no income. And that fear, I can imagine constantly there, Eddie. Tato Munyazi saying, good evening, Naledi. In my community, we now live in fear. I mean, after 2 weeks, there are more than 4 murders. And now we have decided as a community to just lock ourselves by 6 p.m. sharp because even our SAPS are now working with all these thugs. Tato, thank you so much. The trust deficit in our law enforcement. Prof, I'm going to bring you in here because that's the reality. Is in the community, we can talk until we're blue in the face about police visibility in your community. But if you don't trust that matter will be taken further, you're not going to trust that you'll feel protected. Some of the points that have been made, for instance, in response to these numbers by the Democratic Alliance has been organized crime needs better intelligence and the coordination that you touched on earlier.
Yes, trust deficit is a very serious, ticking bomb in South Africa. When we talk about statistics, we are talking about whether, at a particular level, whatever that has been communicated to the communities, either it filtered well for them to say that, I can go forward. It's only through, matters that we can say, there is some accuracy. But in terms of rape and other categories, of crime, it boils down to, police officials working together with thugs. And, the minister has been talking about zero tolerance. And zero tolerance, it does not only touch about, those that are doing operations, but also about management. So if then those that are leading, the soldiers, on the ground are seen to be colluding with politicians, and when you look also at appointments at particular, levels, you see that the endorsement of certain politicians to certain individuals who are supposed to be, trusted. It then talks to then the risk that we are facing as communities that, people will be compromised. I mean, how many people who, have been killed because they were working at certain high risk, operations. You talk about, the leader who was killed in Western Cape, leading the
Shalkania.
Exactly. So, and then you look at also about the substance, regarding that, and as well as, what the former minister used to talk about, referring to other cases where, it can be affirmed that, certain individuals within law enforcement are compromised. So for that effect, then, we see at the prevalence and as well as can people really trust the police official? And you look at infiltration of organized crime in South Africa and how, aggressive it is, and then whether do we have the capacity to be able to report on fellow officials who are also becoming weakest links. So these are a concoction of factors that we need to be able to look as we analyze this particular statistics, that can we really bring whole of a society approach towards working with police officials, because at the end of the day, we agree that whatever South African Police Service is confronted with, it needs a multifaceted, approaches as well as systematic, strategies that need to be implemented. But also, my problem is, if you look at, I'm sure General will agree with me. Look about how reforms, how many reforms, we have been informed about within South African Police Service. But every time when a new, police commissioner comes on board, that particular person comes with a different, mandate. So then we are saying that, who actually is supposed to give direction? Is it the office of, the president or the minister or any person who's now appointed as a police commissioner comes with that? So we see this integrated. There's been so many where people are being, uprooted from their units. Hence we see many detectives leaving South African Police Service because of what? Because of the environment, because the environment is not conducive, and because of the understanding of those who are coming to take that office, whether do they understand, in terms of the direction where South Africa is supposed to go. So these are the things that, we have to deal, we have to cut the infiltration of, corruption underworld within law enforcement, but also, how politicians are, somehow interfering with the operations. I was glad when, Minister Mchunu indicated that, well, he will have to give a free role to, General Masemola, whereby there will be separation of what the police are doing as well as, political interference. So hopefully, with what we have seen today in terms of reduction of crime, but then we need to see a holistic, view. But also, we also need to think about unemployment rate in South Africa, where we see young people taking almost 60%. That if we see many women being killed, children being killed, who are doing that? It could be men who are very angry, who are feeling like they are dispossessed and they cannot go anywhere. Minister also made mention of, organized crime, of which, illegal mining is the issue. It also talks on what? On the government response in terms of unemployment. So these things, as the minister indicated, that it is a holistic approach, and that needs to be put into...
So many holes that need to be taken care of. Very, very worrying. But we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue the discussion. Of course, Prof, they're touching on strategies. We'll look at some of the strategies that are being used by our police currently. Stilfontein, certainly a big talking point. Stay with us. We're back in a moment. You're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition. We're asking, how has crime affected you? And as you look at the crime stats released today, are you seeing a difference in your own community? Give us a call on 010-594-6010 or send us a WhatsApp 072-110-5584. We're still in studio with crime expert Professor Jacob Mofokeng on video link. We have KwaZulu-Natal Community Policing Forum Secretary Siyanda Biyela, Safer South Africa Foundation CEO General Riah Phiyega, Popcru spokesperson Richard Mamabolo, and Western Cape Community Police Board spokesperson Rafique Foflonker. General, I want to bring you back in here, General Phiyega, because if we look at the issue that Prof had raised just before the break there around strategies that need to be improved. In fact, we talked about how strategies may change depending on who sits as in the chair that you previously sat in. But I want to look at one that we're following up now in Stilfontein. A lot of debate around how police have dealt with that matter. I wonder, as you watched it, if you thought this could possibly be us looking at another Marikana, General.
Thank you very much for that question. I think my response to that one is the police are very articulate in terms of the job that they need to do in that area. We understand that there are a lot of sensitivities as to that matter. What I've listened to the police indicating, and the fact that they responded to what the court has ruled, but they are very steadfast in terms of the work that they have to do. They are the law enforcement officers, and indeed they should be allowed to be able to do that within the prescriptions of the law of this country. because it is one thing to talk about the crime statistics that we're talking about now, and when there's an outcry in those communities about how their peace and their safety is being violated by the Zama people in those communities. So we need to look for a balance in terms of intervention and be very cautious as a society not to allow sensationalism to make it impossible to have those balanced interventions. So my argument would be there should be a balanced intervention, right? We cannot just use sensationalism to trump the responsibility and duty that the police have. And indeed, one is feeling a little bit comforted by the fact that they are responsive to what the courts are directing them to do, balanced intervention, and that intervention should be able to give us the outcomes that we all desire as a country, a crime-free, a secure country that does not, propel criminality in the country.
Yeah, because it's that age-old debate around the human rights, the right to life of alleged criminals in the country versus how police react in KZN, Siyanda. That's been quite the debate, right? With, the provincial police commissioner defending sometimes shootouts that have taken place between suspects and police, ending up seeing the death of suspects. So are you happy with the strategy that is being used in KZN to deal with crime?
I've said this before. In August, I was here reiterating and giving support on behalf of the Provincial Commissioner. We must, as a community, be honest and say, yes, we want to see justice. And sometimes we want to see justice go through courts. And that is the legal way and the law way prescribed by the Constitution. But again, we can't allow a situation where police officers are faced with people who are unruly in our communities, people who are masterminds of extortion and chaos in our communities, who are well vested with guns. That's why I think one of the professors was saying the issue that even security companies are best equipped more than the South African Police Service. Then it asks you a question that, do they really think the South African Police Service can render the service? So if they check them, they are then met with the match, which then unfortunately we can't control in the instance where the scenes are. But we still call on all measures must be taken into account so that we bring them to book through the criminal justice system, the courts, and the rehabilitation process of the correctional services. But we still say we do not want to maintain the death of a police officer or an official on the hands of the criminals.
Yeah. 17 police officers that were killed between July and September. That's what we heard from the stats. Rafique, is this a strategy that should be employed in the Western Cape, fighting fire with fire?
The authority of the state must be stamped on crime. And the police must never be afraid to go into some of these locations and informal settlements, because if they do, then the people that live there are left with what? No security, no protection. The police must never be afraid to execute their mandate. And, police officers stand alone in court when they have to defend themselves against a murder charge. And so every time they discharge their firearm, every time they're accused of, excessive force, they have to defend themselves. So I don't know that I have seen too many police officers that like to discharge their firearm or shoot at people, because the consequences for them are just very, very great. But at the same time, we need to look at criminals who are willing to take on the police. If they can shoot at the police, if they have no regard for the police and the protection of our country's democracy through the, through the protection of the state, then what respect and what compassion will they have for the average person, for their family members, for their neighbors? So we don't advocate murder on the part of the police, but we certainly don't advocate that they should stand by and not defend themselves and not protect the citizens and not protect the state. They need to take action. They need to mean business, and they must do it thoughtfully. And they must do it in a way that actually brings about a true justice. But they certainly should not be shot at, and they don't sign up to give their lives to protect us without any real value in exchange for that. So yeah, that's basically the high level.
Yeah, Richard, perhaps this is where I bring you in here, Popcru's position on just how police are capacitated. And I'm talking in the daily activity of being on the ground, right? The reality that has been shared that, well, at times police themselves meet fire. Adele talking about just how much guns are available in our communities, a lot of them even stolen from police. So not an easy job to do in this country of ours.
Yeah, well, the panelists are quite correct. In fact, over the past 2 years, we've seen a lot of police stations also being attacked, Part of the challenge, of course, has been the fact that I've alluded to earlier about the uneven allocation of resources. You go to any police station in the rural areas, in the township, you find that they've got lesser resources than those within affluent areas. So they've clearly become a target. They've been quite well confronted for their firearms, even on the streets, of course. Due to limited capacity, you find that police are patrolling in smaller numbers and they do get attacked. So for that, I think even in instances where people would say police are heavy-handed, especially in KZN, the reality of the matter is that after police having attacked certain hideouts, you would find that those people had serious firearms. And of course, it then depends as to whether we lose the life of a police officer or the lives of those criminals. So we cannot necessarily say it's a strategy, because I think one of the discussions we've been having for quite some time has been around how to deal with police killings. And in fact, Popcru held policing in late last year, wherein we obviously brought in all stakeholders to look into how we can work together to fight crime, but also to keep police killings. And part of the suggestions that were made there was that there should be legislative amendments made to ensure that police killings becomes considered as prisoners, because it is a clear attack on the state. And we think that through some of these discussions, we will obviously be working towards ensuring that we provide better societies. But I think as well, the problem has been that we have been very reactive generally. We react to crime, and we also need to acknowledge the role that organizations like Safer South Africa Foundation play. They have actually looked into a long-term project of ensuring that from a young age, through high schools, by the way, they train younger people to get familiar with the criminal justice cluster and to understand what it's all about. And that we believe, of course, Maria would speak better around that. But it's a project that would look into ensuring that as much as we complain about short-term challenges, in the longer term, we've got younger people that are growing into understanding what the criminal justice cluster is about, and probably provide both solutions towards fighting crime in the country.
Okay, well, let's let General Phiyega then respond to that. Of course, she's speaking to us in her capacity as founder and CEO of Safer South Africa Foundation. As we wrap it up, General, and we'll go through our panel and get final recommendations so we can all start thinking about that. But priorities at this point, General.
Thank you very much, and thank you for what Richard has said. I think right now we're sitting here looking at all the reactive interventions that we have to execute as a country after crime has happened. And if I look at these crime statistics, it is very clear that crime statistics in educational premises are on the rise. And these are talking about people who we still consider as youth and children. So we have a critical role. There's a big space for what we call crime prevention. We actually have to ensure that we invest in a future that will be crime averse. So the program that we are running really, together with the entire security cluster, is to be in schools, to educate our young people to understand these crime discussions that we are having, to understand the role of the criminal justice system. We don't actually teach. We work with the police, the NPA, the traffic department, the magistrates, the correctional service, Human Rights Commission, the banks, to be out there and offer education to the young ones. And longitudinally, South Africa will later see that we are having children who are resolved, who are activists, who choose not to do crime. So crime prevention, we talk about social crime prevention in a lot of these departments, but the investment in terms of doing in that area is not high. So as an NGO, we're working in partnership with all these departments in many schools in the 9 provinces to bring education, and with the Department of Basic Education. And I'm saying that's one area that we should look into as intervention towards the multiplicity of interventions that the panelists have been talking about, that the department is talking about.
Right.
And we are very, very determined to
absolutely. General, an absolute pleasure hearing from you. And we're going to get more recommendations on the other side of this break from the rest of our panelists. But her recommendation, invest in preventing crime. We're back in a moment.